Right, what I have learned in more recent years is that learning how to listen well is one of the most powerful communication skills that we can develop. But in order to be able to do that, we've got to understand what all the different types of listening are. So without further ado, let me introduce you to what I define as the foundations of communicating, listening. And there are, in fact, 9 types. So you can benefit greatly from learning about the different types of listening, all of which are important to understand both in personal relationships and intimate relationships, especially in marriage and in family, and also at work. The first type I want to introduce you to will be comprehensive listening. Now, I don't know whether you've engaged in any comprehensive listening up until now. If you've taken a number of my training courses, there's a pretty good chance that you are, because we'll have talked about this before. Comprehensive listening is when you make sound judgments based on what another person says and determine the truthfulness of what you hear. Comprehensive listening involves one person listening to the other for the purpose of comprehending, of understanding. Right, come on, there's ways in which some people can communicate, and I've engaged in communications like this in the past, where one person is speaking to another, perhaps you're speaking to a friend, and you're halfway through a sentence, you stop for a second to think about what you're going to say next, and then the other person just jumps in and off they go. It's kind of like just dual monologue happening, 2 monologues happening at the same time, where neither party are actually listening to each other. Both parties are actually more just interested in talking at each other and being heard or being listened to. But comprehensive listening is when you are listening without judgment. You're listening free from bias, without prejudice. Right? Are you listening to me right now without prejudice? Perhaps you don't like my accent. Maybe you don't like my shirt or my jacket, or maybe you just don't like guys with bald slap heads. I'm not quite sure. But is there something about me that's distracting you away from listening comprehensively? I don't know. That's going to be determined by how disciplined a listener you are. All right, so then we have critical listening, which is very different. Comprehensive listening, where we're listening to understand the person. Critical listening tends to be the listening pattern of those people who are slightly closed-minded, not really interested in understanding any perspective that differs from their own. Critical listening is where we're listening to another person, or we might be reading a book critically. We're looking to pick flaws. Any idea or any notion that doesn't fit in with our own personal narrative, we will be critical of, right? So it's critical listening that's given birth to the critical mindset that has gone on and given birth to cancel culture throughout the 2020s. Right? The emerging generations, not characterised by age, by the way, but by attitude. The emerging generations today have a tendency to lash out at those people who say and do things that they don't agree with. All right? Critical. We then have discriminative listening. Discriminative listening enables us to pick up on verbal cues that indicate what the speaker is truly saying or what emotions they are trying to express. Right? Discriminative listening. Discriminative listening that has the maturity to be able to look past the imperfections of the communicator. Right? It kind of goes a little bit beyond comprehensive listening, where we're not just looking to understand what a person's saying, but we're actually looking to break through the words to hear the essence of what a person's all about. We're looking to experience life through their eyes. We're looking to understand what they feel. And it requires quite a bit of discipline, quite a bit of effort. But it enables us to pick up on verbal cues that indicate what the speaker is truly saying or what emotions they are trying to express. Right, think about the last time you maybe had a conversation with someone who expressed themselves through anger. So you're having a conversation with someone and this person's really angry. Right, okay, so the critical listener will say, I don't like how you're speaking to me. I'm offended at how you're speaking to me. You can't speak to me like that. The comprehensive listener will be, okay, so you're angry about something. I want to understand what it is that you're angry about. The discriminative listener will be looking past the words and the emotions and the anger expression and, okay, so this person is feeling, sensing some form of injustice, because it's injustice, if you think about it, that we tend to get frustrated about the most, isn't it? When we are unjustly treated. So the discriminative listener will just go deeper than, as deep as physically possible. We then have therapeutic listening, all right? And some people are great at this, some people better than others. Therapeutic listening makes it mandatory to listen for information. The main point is to emphasize that you understand the person you're talking to. Therapeutic listening. In my experience, therapeutic listening can sometimes be a little bit shallow and a little bit false. All right? I don't know if you've ever watched a movie where a counsellor or some form of therapist is sitting at the end of a kind of sofa having a communication or interaction with their therapy or mentee or whatever, the person who goes to therapy. And the therapist says, and what's your relationship like with your dad? And what's your relationship like with your mum? And how does this make you feel? Then the person starts talking, and the therapeutic listening is, that's right. And what else do you feel? And what else do you see? And what else do you think? And therapeutic listening, on one level, is useful because it gives some people the time and space that they need to be able to work out their inner worlds, but it's not particularly reflective, all right, unlike discriminative listening or comprehensive listening. So what else have we got? Full listening. Now, if you and I ever meet, this is what you get from me. Right? Full listening is when you aim to fully understand what the content or intentions of a conversation is. A highly useful skill to have when studying or learning. Full listening. All right? We're not just looking to understand the person, but we're looking to understand the context, the reason why the person's having a communication. We're also looking to, see if we can identify the purpose of the person wanting to have the communication. We're just questions, we're naturally intrigued. We then have deep listening. Deep listening is more involved than full listening, believe it or not. Full listening's kind of primarily, I'd say, on context, right? Context is always relevant. Deep listening, more about the person, the needs of the individual person. Deep listening is more involved than full listening. It requires you and another speaker to understand each other's perspectives. Deep listening. Okay, this is where, imagine you were to enter into an argument with someone, or someone's really fallen out with you, all right? And once all the emotions have kind of blown over, you initiate the conversation. Says, can we just, be real here? I'm wondering if we could just be completely honest about the circumstance that's resulted in us having this kind of adverse interaction, falling out, becoming estranged. Because I really wouldn't want that to happen again, because I value the connection that we have. So could we just talk through this so we can understand each other? So we can just understand each other, and that's it. And there's complete eye contact, and there's full involvement, complete engagement. Come on, sometimes we'll interact with people. There's a restaurant that I go to close to where I live. And honestly, it's one of the finest restaurants in Scotland, really is. But one of the managers, very, very hard work to remain engaged with. All right, when we go in there, at a first glance, you might think, wow, this individual is personable, they're engaging, they're sociable, very warm and inviting. Until you understand communication skills in quite a profound way, and you realise that this person just monologues, talks and talks and talks and talks, and will talk at you, and will talk at you really well, and will talk at you in a really inclusive way, and will talk at you in a way that actually leaves you feeling quite valued and quite important, until you attempt to open your mouth to respond. All right, and you'll realise that it's kind of like listening to an old cassette tape. All right, I don't know if you ever listened to meditative cassette tapes all these many years ago. I remember listening to one, I think it was a guy called Paul McKenna, all right, and listening to this, and you're kind of lying there and you've got this voice in your head, and it just kind of feels like you're in some sort of dialogue with the person. And you just naturally want to kind of get involved and say something back. And with this individual, you realise that the second you try to interact in the monologue, you're hitting a brick wall. There's nothing there. The person has no interest in connecting with you, just interested in doing the communication, saying what needs to be said or what the individual wants to say, and then she'll go and say the same to another individual, and that's kind of it. And the thing is, once you understand what people want, once you can see where people are at relationally, you'll be able to better understand what relationships are worthwhile investing effort into and which ones just aren't at all. There's no point in working hard to listen to and understand a person who just wants to talk at you, who just wants to monologue at you. All right. Over time, if you're able to identify someone genuinely does want to connect with you, then that's when listening comes in. But in order to identify these people, deep listening, full listening is usually quite important. Through full listening, deep listening, you can identify that another person isn't even remotely interested in listening to you or hearing from you or connecting with you. Then this is where selective listening can come into play. All right, it's when you only address certain aspects of what another person has said to filter the message and quickly understand its intent. Just so you know that you can say the right words, offer the right response, if there is a right, whatever, just about responding in the most appropriate way as to not unnecessarily offend. But here's the thing, if a person doesn't want to hear from you, there's no point in opening your mouth. You can save yourself the energy. That's one of the really cool things about learning to communicate, and especially listen well. I remember throughout my 20s and my early 30s, I had this real thing inside for wanting to be listened to and heard and understood. Until I realised that some people go through life never learning how to listen. So what's the point in me trying to communicate with another person, trying to explain myself or justify myself or share off myself if another person has no interest in listening and understanding? It's kind of like blowing into the wind, right? It's pointless. So you can save yourself a lot of energy. And this is where listening comes in. Through listening, you can identify those individuals who are going to be worthwhile investing into conversationally and which ones aren't. Right? Not all people are worth your energy. Right? This is what listening actually enables you to identify. There's no point in me sharing all sorts of phenomenal communication skills with you if you cannot identify those people who are going to be worthwhile investing into from which ones aren't. You identify this through listening. Selective listening. So we have partial listening. It's when you have the intention to listen to another person but are distracted. This keeps you from hearing the other person completely. I remember years ago I was driving, I think, through to Glasgow one day with a young man who I was mentoring at the time. And I was driving, he was sitting in the passenger seat, and we were talking about something. He asked me a question. Now, typically, when people ask you a question, it's because they're interested in understanding your answer or your response to a question. So I just kind of authentically just started responding, speaking out. I was just conscious. When I communicate, as you're probably starting to notice, if I go silent for a second, or if you see my eyes kind of point up to the sky, that's me choosing my words carefully so that what I say next is gives an accurate reflection of what I intended or hope to say. So I communicate intentionally, all right? Otherwise, I can end up just, and I historically have ended up just saying a whole load of unnecessary words and making a whole load of unnecessary noise. So I was taking my few moments to consider what I needed to say next. And then the young man in question asked me another question. I hadn't even responded or given an answer to the first question, and I realised this guy isn't listening to understand. He's communicating and asking questions just to try to prove to me that he's interested in hearing what I have to say. He's more interested in appeasing me than in listening to and understanding me. Interesting observation. You've got to be pretty self-aware to be able to identify this. But think about how many conversations you've been in the past that were just shallow or superficial, that went nowhere. At the end of a communication, you were left frustrated because you know that this other person didn't listen to you and didn't hear what you had to say. Now, again, there's no point in trying to convince a person of you or that what you know is valuable if a person's not interested in understanding you or what you have to know or what you already know. Partial listening. Then we have superficial listening. It's false listening. It's when you pretend you're listening to another person but are not comprehending what you're hearing. You're smiling, you may nod, you may say, "Amen, preach it, brother." When you think it's appropriate, you just can act and conduct yourself however you need to try to show this other person that you're there when actually you're just not. You're more interested in kind of just deceiving this other person. Superficial listening. All right, it's kind of like, picture the parent, the mum or the dad, who knows best, and they're kind of nagging on at their young child. He's saying, "You shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't do that, and you shouldn't do the next thing, and you shouldn't do this thing." The child says, "Yeah, I know, yes, mum, no, mum, yes, dad, no, dad." Or the employee at work who's just nodding head, yes, and you can see that they're not paying attention to the word you're saying. Superficial listening. So, communication foundations, 9 types of listening.